Legends and Lattes is a really good book. That's basically the spoiler-free review of this book. It's really it's really whimsical and fun and romantic even, and well developed. It has a little bit of world building in it if that's what you like, if you need that. But that's not really the main thrust of the story. It just has a really cool kind of chill, whimsical, fun plot line of somebody just kind of building something cool, you know. And so that's like the spoiler-free review. Really, really, really good book. So now from here on in, there'll be spoilers, so just be aware of that. And I strongly recommend that you go read or listen to this book first, because it's really good. And the reason I say listen is because it's actually narrated by the author, and he does a fantastic job narrating it. I think he's a narrator outside of like his own book. And so he really brings it to life, and you really get the feeling that the author is... You get a bit more of the author's voice, I suppose, because he's, he's able to emphasize what he wants to emphasize in these sort of things. But yeah, so strongly recommend you go read it or listen to it. Although I will say that spoilers won't necessarily ruin it, because as I say, it's a bit of a... The plot's a little bit, almost arguably less important. So let's talk about it. So this book basically... we start off where we have this adventuring orc, and she's giant. She's like, I don't know, I imagine her like 7 feet tall and jacked, right? And she decides that she doesn't want to be like an adventurer anymore, doesn't want to keep killing people, understandable. So she wants to open a coffee shop because she had some coffee one time and she really liked it, also understandable. And so she has this kind of stone that's supposed to bring her good luck, and this is kind of a theme throughout the story, whether the stone actually does anything, and we'll get to that a bit later. But anyway, so she goes and opens a coffee shop by buying a stable, and she has money saved up, and then, she kind of meets a few different people along the way. So she meets this kind of like carpenter woodworker guy who she uses to help like refurbish the shop, and then she posts an ad, and she meets a succubus, because it's like a fantasy world, so we've got orcs, succubi, and gnomes, elves as well, I think. And so she meets the succubus, who starts working in a coffee shop, and they refurbish this whole building, and then she starts a coffee shop, and business is slow to begin with, but it picks up, and eventually she's got this kind of what's the word, like kind of, seminal place in the community that, everybody likes. And there's a little bit of drama along the way with these kind of, I suppose you'd call them gangsters, maybe the mafia or something would be a kind of a reasonable point of comparison, where she, they're shaking her down for extra money, but she's not a big fan of that. And so that's kind of one point of drama in the story, is like she doesn't want to pay, they wanted to pay, so it kind of gets sorted out. I believe the eventual solution, she just gives them coffee and cakes, which, fair enough. And then we have the other bit of drama is that this guy from her former crew, he's interested in the stone because he thinks it brings good luck, as does she. Everyone thinks this at this time. And so he's trying to get it. At one point, he breaks into her house to try and steal it. Doesn't work out, and so he comes back later and burns down her whole, because she lives in the coffee shop upstairs, so he burns down this whole thing. And that's very bad, and it's kind of the low point of our story, because we've kind of been going just basically up and up with a few little dips when we're dealing with the drama, but, this is kind of the low point of our story. The whole place burns down, she's very sad, understandably, she's injured, she's depressed, she's lashing out, because the thing is, she's kind of views herself as, and I guess the story views her as kind of reformed, or in a process of reforming, because she used to be quite a violent person, because of her past as an adventurer, and so we kind of see a little bit of that kind of coming through when she's, when she's out of it, when she's depressed, when she's not in her new environment she's created for herself. But then she's able to, she's kind of built up, because she's been so nice, she's built up like a standing in the community. All her customers like her, all her friends like her. And so because of that, she kind of is able to cash that in, so to speak. And everybody comes and helps her rebuild, alongside a little bit of money that she had saved, still helps her rebuild her coffee house, even sort of bigger and better, which gives her opportunities for expansion. And a book kind of ends with her and her friends, her giving her friends a stake in the coffee house, the cafe, I suppose. And then that's kind of the end of the book. But there is one sort of plotline that I haven't touched on, which I'm going to go back through and talk about, which is her the romance plotline with her friend, the succubus, the one who's been working with her, and I guess the first thing to clarify is in this story, succubi aren't like evil or anything; they're just different, which I think is a really cool take on sort of, I suppose, race relations in fantasy stories, which is that, yeah, they're different, but they're not evil or good; they just are like anybody else, and then just have to understand them, So anyway, so as I said, this book starts with the succubi comes and answers her ad for an employee, and then they start to work together, and they slowly develop a little bit of chemistry, and you can start to... At first, it really feels like a friendship, right? Which, honestly, is pretty true to a lot of real-life relationships. Maybe you work with a coworker, you develop a friendship, and then you can slowly start to see some hints of it developing into something more, but they're both very guarded and reserved people, which makes sense if you consider their pasts. So the succubus's past is that she... And I'm really sorry, I forget her name, which is annoying me, because I just finished the book. But anyway, her past... she was sort of objectified and sexualized a lot, being a succubus. And we kind of get this idea that, the succubi, they have this like sort of thing where their emotions pull on other people. And if you are a horny dude and only really interested in one thing, then that feels very much like lust, right? But if you are emotionally connected, then that feels a bit different. But anyway, so her past is being all, sort of objectified and judged for who she is. And then Viv, our main character's past, is, obviously being all violence and closed off and stuff as well. So these two are very, even though it starts to become relatively obvious that they want to come together, they're both very guarded, and so kind of develop slowly over time. They work together as co-workers, and eventually they have a picnic together, and you kind of get a little bit of that chemistry, but then they both back off again because they're all nervous. And then, they start to slowly come back together again, and then, when there's a threat of this guy trying to steal the stone, they decide to share a room together to, I guess for security. And again, we have that little bit of chemistry, but once again, they're so nervous of each other. And then finally, towards the end, after the fire, Viv becomes, I guess she just realizes what what she could have lost, and so she's able to kind of express that a little bit. But it's still, because of obviously all the issues after the fire, it doesn't really come together. And then the book kind of ends with they've bonded so much, and the coffee house is all back together and rebuilt and everything, and so they are, there's no external issues, and now they're really just able to kind of come together. And the book ends, it's really beautiful. Earlier on in the story, Viv didn't even have a bed, and so they had to sleep on the floor. And then she makes 2 upstairs rooms of a new coffee house, one for her and one for her succubus. So one for her, I suppose, girlfriend now. And it's just really beautiful, and it's a really poignant way of ending the story. And so I really love the end of the story as well, where it ends with her kind of giving a stake in her venture to all her friends who've helped her so much that she feels that they deserve it, right? That they are part of the business and part of the cafe, I suppose. And then so she gives a stake to them in the business, and then she's able to develop her relationship with that person. And so it's just really, it's a really beautiful story, to be honest. I really enjoyed it, and it has just that kind of fun. It's a little bit lighthearted. Like, there's a little bit of drama. The place gets burnt down, so there certainly is a little bit of drama. But for the most part, it's just kind of a lighthearted, fun story about an orc making a cafe. I mean, it is what it says on the cover, so to speak, And my friend who was describing the story to me, and he was like, "Yeah, it's pretty chilled out, it's just like an orc opening a cafe." And I was like, "That sounds good to me, And I'd say if I were to compare this to another story, I would say it's really quite comparable to the Discworld novels, the Moist von Lipwig novels. So, Going Postal, Raising Steam, and the other one, Making Money, where basically this guy who has a troubled past is put in charge of, something, and he needs to refurbish it. So, for example, in that first one, he goes to... In that first one, he has to refurbish the post office, and it starts off really derelict, and he makes it into something functional and beautiful. And I think that it's very similar to the story we have here, where we have, somebody with a troubled past, but this time she's doing it on her own accord rather than being forced into it. So it's a little bit different, but it's still that same thing, same idea. Where, someone with a troubled past finds some like old derelict place, refurbishes it into something beautiful, something different, and develops as a person along the way. And so I would be not surprised to see if that was an inspiration for this author when he was writing the story, but it really works, and it's not derivative in any way at all. It's just you can kind of see those, those connections. But you could almost argue the story is a little bit stronger because our protagonist actually has a real passion for what she's doing. She's not forced into anything; she really wants to do it. And it's just, and then we have this kind of like theme along the way of like this wishing stone sort of thing. Not wishing stone, sorry, the stone that brings good luck. Like, does it actually do anything? I mean, or is it just a random stone that like supposed to bring good luck? And what becomes relatively clear towards the end is that the stone doesn't necessarily bring good luck, but it brings good people to you, or brings people that are similar to you, which is interesting because if you were to have one criticism of this story, you could say, well, everything's a little bit too convenient. Like, all these people just happen to come to her and they all happen to work together really well. But of course, that's actually explained in the lore of the book, which is that the stone attracts people that are similar to you, right? And so that actually explains why she finds all these people she works really well with. But it's not a cheat code. It's kind of, it's implied strongly it's not a cheat code. It's not like, it doesn't make the people like you or anything. You still, but because Viv is actually such a nice person at this stage, that those people are attracted to her, then she's able to, sort of convince them that she's nice, and that they all bond together. And then we get the kind of nice scenes at the end where they rebuild the coffee house together. So yeah, that's really strange. And then the one kind of last thing I'd like to touch on is and it's kind of a random detail, but it's sort of appreciated, where there's this gnome who comes and he plays chess at the coffee house, right, with himself, which is a big mystery. And I think it becomes relatively clear that he's like omnipotent in some way, because he keeps like having like referring to like stuff that's happening in the future. So for example, he walks by them, these two, Viv and her girlfriend, I suppose, or soon to be girlfriend, and he's like, "Oh, congratulations are in order," and she's like, "For what?" And he's like, "Oh, maybe not yet, then not yet." And I think it's relatively strongly implied that he is omnipotent in some way or knows the future in some way. And it's kind of like just tossed in. I wonder if it's maybe something for... I wonder if the author has plans for writing more books in this world or in the series, perhaps. Although I will say that this closed off very well, so definitely not necessary. But maybe that's where that guy's coming from, where he kind of gives me more chilled out version of Hoyd. You know, if you've read Brandon Sanderson stories, Hoyd is like, you know, semi-omnipotent, like very knowledgeable guy who kind of shows up in all Brandon stories. And this guy gave me similar vibes to that, so I wonder if that's maybe what the author's going for. But honestly, I've rambled for ages. It's a long video. But yeah, I just conclude with that. I really love the story. If you're into more kind of chilled out, fun, whimsical stories, still a little bit of drama to keep you there, but really just kind of chilled out, fun, something a bit different, you know, fantasy world with coffee. I mean, it's not a combination I've seen before. And yeah, honestly, really, really love the story. So I'd strongly recommend giving it a read or a listen, as I say, because the author narrates it. So yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.